The story begins not on Earth but far away, on a planet named Nibiru. This world, a wanderer in our solar system, faced a great crisis. Its atmosphere was thinning, its climate failing. The wise ones of Nibiru, the Anunnaki, knew their survival depended on one precious element, gold. Not for wealth, but for survival. They needed fine gold dust to scatter into their skies, a glittering shield to heal their world. Their astronomers looked to the heavens and found a prize. Earth, the third planet from the sun, was rich with this vital metal. And so a mission was planned. A great journey across the dark void of space was about to begin, driven by desperation and hope. Led by their ruler Anu, the Anunnaki prepared their celestial ships. These were not simple vessels but grand chariots of fire, capable of traversing the immense distances between worlds. Their journey was long and perilous. They navigated past giant planets and through asteroid fields. Their destination was a blue and green jewel hanging in the blackness of space. As they approached, they saw vast oceans, swirling white clouds, and continents of brown and green. They had arrived. Their ships descended through Earth's thick atmosphere, tearing through the sky like falling stars. They landed in the fertile lands between two great rivers, a place we would one day call Mesopotamia. The air was thick and strange, but their mission was clear. They had come to mine the gold and save Nibiru. The first Anunnaki to set foot on Earth were pioneers. They were scientists, engineers, and warriors. They felt the heavy gravity of this new world, so different from their own. The sun seemed brighter, the days and nights shorter. They established their first settlement, Eridu, meaning home in the faraway. It was a base of operations, a foothold in a primitive and untamed land. They began the arduous task of surveying the terrain, charting the rivers, and locating the richest veins of gold. The work was difficult, more challenging than they had anticipated. The land was wild, filled with strange creatures and harsh conditions. The Anunnaki were powerful, but they were few, and the task ahead was monumental. Their initial plan was to extract gold from the waters of the great rivers. They built sophisticated filtration systems, but the yield was too low. The real wealth lay deep within the earth, buried in hard rock in a distant land they called the Abzu, in southeastern Africa. This meant a much larger operation was needed. They would have to dig deep mines, cut through stone, and haul immense quantities of ore. The Anunnaki astronauts, who were not meant for such grueling labor, began to toil under the alien sun. They worked for long periods, their spirits wearying. Their mission, once a beacon of hope, was becoming a sentence of hard labor on a foreign world. They were far from home, and the promise of a quick return was fading. The Anunnaki brought with them technology that must have seemed like pure magic to the primitive Earth. Their tools could cut through solid rock as if it were soft clay. They used beams of light to quarry massive stone blocks and sonic devices to lift them effortlessly into place. They built magnificent cities with towering ziggurats that reached for the heavens, structures that served as both command centers and homes. These were not just simple buildings, they were feats of advanced engineering, aligned with the stars and humming with cosmic energy. Their knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and physics was millennia ahead of anything that would develop on Earth for ages. They were masters of science, applying their knowledge to tame a wild planet. Their primary mission, the mining of gold, required immense effort. In the deep mines of the Abzu, the Anunnaki worked in grueling conditions. They used laser-like instruments to carve tunnels deep into the Earth's crust, following the veins of precious metal. Automated chariots, which we might call vehicles, transported the ore to processing facilities. There the rock was crushed, smelted, and refined into pure gold. The process was efficient but relentless. The Anunnaki who were assigned this duty grew tired. They had not traveled across the solar system to become miners. They were astronauts and scientists, and the endless, backbreaking work began to take its toll on their morale. Discontent began to simmer in the dark, dusty tunnels. Beyond mining, the Anunnaki terraformed the land to suit their needs. They dug vast canal systems to irrigate the arid Mesopotamian plains, turning the desert into a lush garden. These canals were laid out with incredible precision, transforming the landscape and making large-scale agriculture possible. They established fields and cultivated crops native to Nibiru, creating a familiar environment far from home. Their understanding of biology allowed them to create new strains of plants that thrived in Earth's environment. They were not just visitors. They were shaping the very face of the planet, building a new civilization from the ground up, a reflection of their distant home world. Despite their incredible technology, the Anunnaki faced a critical problem, a labor shortage. The number of Anunnaki on Earth was limited, and the scale of the gold mining operation was immense. The workers in the mines were stretched to their breaking point. The journey from Nibiru was long, and reinforcements were slow to arrive. The discontent that had been simmering finally boiled over. The mining astronauts staged a revolt, throwing down their tools and refusing to work. They marched to the city of Enlil, the mission commander, and surrounded his dwelling, demanding an end to their hardship. The entire mission was in jeopardy. A solution was needed, and it had to be found quickly. The fate of Nibiru hung in the balance. The revolt of the mining astronauts sent shockwaves through the Anunnaki command. Enlil, the stern and disciplined commander of the Earth mission, was furious. He saw the rebellion as a direct challenge to his authority and to the survival of Nibiru. He wanted to punish the mutineers harshly, to make an example of them. The Anunnaki Council was convened, a gathering of the highest-ranking leaders on Earth. The atmosphere was tense. On one side stood Enlil, arguing for order and discipline at any cost. On the other side were the weary miners, who pleaded their case, describing the unbearable toil and the hopelessness of their situation. The future of the entire enterprise rested on the outcome of this critical meeting. Among the council members was Enki, Enlil's half-brother. Enki was the chief scientist, a brilliant and curious being who was in charge of the Abzu operations. Unlike Enlil, Enki felt sympathy for the workers. He understood their exhaustion and their desperation. He had witnessed their suffering firsthand. He argued against a harsh punishment, urging the council to seek a different solution. Punishing the miners would not get the gold out of the ground. They needed a new source of labor, a way to continue the mission without breaking the backs of their own people. The debate raged on, with Enlil demanding force and Enki pleading for ingenuity. The council was divided, caught between the need for gold and the welfare of its people. As the arguments went back and forth, Enki presented a radical idea. He had been studying the native life forms on Earth. He was particularly fascinated by a primitive primate, an ape man that walked upright and lived in the grasslands. This creature was strong and adaptable, but it lacked intelligence and awareness. Enki proposed something that stunned the council into silence. "Let us create a worker," he said. He suggested using their advanced genetic knowledge to upgrade this primitive being. They could fashion a new creature in their own image, one intelligent enough to understand commands and strong enough to perform the labor in the mines. This new being would be the Lulu, the primitive worker. The proposal was met with a mixture of awe and horror. To create a new sentient life form was a monumental step, one with profound ethical implications. Enlil was immediately suspicious. He feared that creating an intelligent slave race could lead to unforeseen consequences. What if these new beings became too smart? What if they rebelled? He saw it as a dangerous and arrogant act, a violation of the natural order. Other council members worried about the responsibility they would have for this new creation. Yet the alternative was mission failure. The need for gold was absolute. After a long and intense debate, the council reluctantly gave its approval. Enki was given the go-ahead to begin his unprecedented experiment. With the council's hesitant blessing, Enki retreated to his laboratory, a place the text called the House of Life. Here, surrounded by shimmering crystals and humming devices, he began the most ambitious project of his life. He was assisted by Ninhursag, the chief medical officer, a skilled geneticist in her own right. Their goal was to take the essence of the native ape man and infuse it with the genetic code of the Anunnaki. They were not creating something from nothing, they were accelerating evolution, guiding it with a precise and knowledgeable hand. The first step was to capture several of the wild hominids from the African plains and bring them to the controlled environment of the lab. The challenge was immense, a delicate dance of science and creation. The process of genetic engineering was incredibly complex. Enki and Ninhursag carefully extracted the egg from a female ape man. Then they took the essence, the genetic material from a young Anunnaki male. In a vessel made of clay, a symbolic and literal description of the process, they sought to mix these two elements. The key was to combine them in just the right way, to bind upon it the image of the gods. The texts describe many trials and many errors, The first attempts resulted in creatures that were malformed, unable to survive, or not what they intended. There were beings with defects, creatures that could not speak, and others that were not fit for the work. Each failure was a lesson, pushing Enki and Ninhursag closer to the perfect formula. Finally, after much experimentation, they achieved a breakthrough. They perfected the genetic sequence, the precise combination that would produce a viable and intelligent worker. But there was another hurdle. The genetically modified egg needed a womb in which to grow. An ape-man female could not carry such an advanced embryo to term. A surrogate mother was required. Ninhursag, in an act of immense dedication, volunteered. She declared, "I will be the one to carry the creation." The fertilized egg, containing the blend of earthly and celestial DNA, was implanted into her. The Anunnaki were not just creating a new species. One of their own was to become the birth mother of the first human. The months that followed were filled with anticipation and anxiety. Ninhursag carried the child, and the other Anunnaki watched and waited. When the time came, she gave birth to a boy. He was perfect. He had the features of the Anunnaki, but the earthly strength they desired. Enki held the child and exclaimed, "I have created it! My hands have made it!" They named him Adamu, which meant earthling, or of the earth. He was the first of his kind, a prototype. He was the living proof that Enki's audacious plan had worked. The problem of labor was solved. Now, they just needed to replicate the process and create a workforce to send into the mines. The age of humanity had begun, born in a laboratory to serve the needs of the gods. Adamu and the first generation of humans were unlike any creature that had ever walked the earth. They possessed a unique blend of animal strength and nascent intelligence. In their eyes, there was a flicker of awareness, a curiosity that set them apart from the wild beasts of the plains. They were brought to a special enclosure, a garden in the land of Eden, where they were cared for and observed. For these first humans, the world was a place of overwhelming wonder and confusion. They saw the Anunnaki, tall and radiant beings who moved with grace and power as gods. They listened to their commands without question, their minds not yet capable of forming independent thoughts. Their purpose was simple, to serve. The Anunnaki became their teachers and their masters. They taught the early humans how to use simple tools, how to tend the gardens, and how to perform basic tasks. The humans learned quickly, their genetically enhanced brains absorbing information at an astonishing rate. They looked upon the Anunnaki with a mixture of awe and fear. They saw them operate their flying chariots, use their powerful beam tools, and communicate over vast distances with small glowing devices. To the primitive minds of Adamu and his kin, these were acts of divine power. They mimicked the Anunnaki's speech, learning their language, and began to form the first human words and sentences. Their existence was one of obedience, a life dedicated to the beings who had created them. Enki took a special interest in his creations. He would often visit the Eden, watching the humans as they worked and learned. He saw more than just laborers. He saw the potential for something greater. He noticed their ability to solve simple problems, their capacity for emotion, and their growing sense of self. While Enlil saw them merely as tools, a means to an end, Enki felt a paternal connection to them. He had given them a spark of his own essence, and he felt a responsibility for their well-being. He would speak to them gently, showing them things beyond their simple tasks, nurturing the seeds of consciousness that he himself had planted within their minds. However, a problem soon arose. The first humans were created through a complex process of cloning and surrogacy, and they were unable to procreate on their own. This meant Enki and Ninhursag had to constantly create more workers in their laboratory, a tedious and unsustainable task. The demand for laborers in the mines was growing, and they could not keep up. Enki knew another genetic modification was necessary. He had to give humanity the ability to reproduce, to multiply and fill the earth on their own. This was a dangerous step, one that would surely anger Enlil, as it would give the humans a new level of autonomy. It was a decision that would change the destiny of both species forever. Enki decided to act in secret. He knew Enlil would never approve of giving humans the ability to reproduce. To Enlil, a self-replicating workforce was a workforce that could grow beyond their control. But Enki saw it as the next logical and compassionate step. He returned to his laboratory and performed another feat of genetic manipulation. He altered the genetic code of Adamu and a female counterpart, Tiamat, giving them what the ancient texts call knowing. This was not just knowledge of good and evil, but the biological knowledge of procreation. He unlocked the final piece of their genetic puzzle, making them fully independent beings, capable of creating new life without Anunnaki intervention. This new knowledge was a profound awakening for humanity. It was the moment they truly became self-aware. They began to see themselves not just as servants, but as individuals with their own desires and connections. They looked at each other with new eyes, understanding the differences between male and female. This awakening was also the beginning of their separation from their creators. They started to question their existence. Why were they here? Who were the Anunnaki really? They began to notice the secrets their gods kept from them. They saw that the Anunnaki ate different food, the food of life, and drank a special water that seemed to grant them incredibly long lifespans. The humans started to feel a sense of otherness, a division between master and servant. The humans' growing curiosity led them to explore their surroundings more carefully. They started to notice inconsistencies in the stories they were told. They would overhear conversations between the Anunnaki, catching fragments of information about Nibiru, about the gold mission, and about their own creation. They discovered hidden places within the Anunnaki cities, rooms filled with star charts and complex machinery they could not comprehend. They found carvings on temple walls that depicted the Anunnaki descending from the sky, of genetic manipulation, and of the Great Council. These clues were like pieces of a giant puzzle, slowly revealing the truth of their origin. They were not born from the mud by magic, they were engineered in a laboratory. This discovery was both terrifying and liberating. The awe they felt for their gods began to mix with a new emotion, resentment. They realized they had been created for a single purpose: to be slaves. Their lives were dedicated to the hard labor that the Anunnaki themselves refused to do. The garden they lived in was not a paradise, it was a beautiful cage. This new understanding sparked the first embers of rebellion. They were not content to be mere tools. The divine spark that Enki had placed within them, the spark of Anunnaki consciousness, was now driving them to seek the one thing their creators had not intended for them: freedom. The seeds of awakening had sprouted, and the roots of rebellion were taking hold. The awakening of humanity led inevitably to conflict. As humans multiplied, their numbers grew, and so did their collective consciousness. They began to organize, sharing their secret knowledge and their growing discontent. The work in the mines was brutal and unforgiving. Generations of humans were born into a life of toil, digging the gold that was sent to a distant world they had never seen. They saw the Anunnaki living in splendor in their magnificent cities, while they suffered in the dust and darkness. The whispers of rebellion grew into a unified voice. They began to refuse work, to sabotage equipment, and to demand the same rights and privileges as their creators. The perfect workforce had become a revolutionary force. Enlil was enraged by this turn of events. His worst fears had come to pass. The creatures he had warned against were now challenging Anunnaki authority. He saw their rebellion not as a plea for freedom, but as a flaw in their design, an act of insolence that needed to be crushed. He demanded that the human population be controlled, even culled, to restore order. He argued that they were becoming too numerous and too dangerous. The great ziggurats, once symbols of Anunnaki power, became fortresses. Guards were posted, and the once open relationship between the two species became one of suspicion and hostility. The Earth, which was meant to be a simple mining colony, was now a planet on the brink of civil war. Enki was caught in a moral storm. He watched the humans struggle with a heavy heart. He saw their rebellion not as a flaw, but as the ultimate success of his creation. They were thinking for themselves, fighting for their own destiny. They were behaving exactly like the Anunnaki. He could not bring himself to condemn them. He secretly sympathized with their cause, often intervening in subtle ways to protect them from Enlil's wrath. He would leak information to human leaders, warn them of impending crackdowns, and teach them advanced concepts of agriculture and construction so they could become more self-sufficient. He was torn between his loyalty to his own people and his love for the children he had created. This division between Enki and Enlil became the central conflict that shaped Earth's destiny. It was a battle of philosophies, order versus freedom, control versus compassion. Enlil believed that humanity was a failed experiment that needed to be contained or erased. Enki believed that humanity was a new and beautiful form of life that deserved the chance to find its own way. This divine conflict was mirrored on the ground as groups of humans allied themselves with different Anunnaki factions. Some remained loyal to the stern Enlil, while others followed the benevolent Enki. The world was divided, and a great catastrophe was brewing, one that would threaten to wipe the slate clean and wash away all that had been built. The tension between the Anunnaki and their rebellious creation reached a breaking point. A major celestial event provided Enlil with the opportunity he had been waiting for. The astronomers on Nibiru predicted that their planet's next passage through the inner solar system would cause a massive gravitational disruption. This disruption would trigger a catastrophic event on Earth. A great flood, a global deluge that would wipe out all life on the surface. For Enlil, this was the perfect solution. It was a natural disaster, an act of God that would erase his human problem without him having to directly order their destruction. He convinced the Anunnaki Council to keep this information secret from humanity. They would simply board their skyships and wait out the storm in orbit, returning to a clean planet afterward. Enki was horrified by this decision. To stand by and allow his creation, the entire human race, to perish was unthinkable. He was bound by an oath to the council not to reveal the secret, but his conscience would not let him remain silent. In a clever act of subterfuge, he went to the reed hut of a man he particularly favored, a righteous and intelligent human named Ziusudra, also known as Utnapishtim or Noah in other traditions. Pretending to speak to the wall of the hut, Enki leaked the council's secret plan. He told the wall of the impending flood and gave Ziusudra precise instructions to build a submersible vessel, a preserver of life. He instructed him to gather his family and the seeds of all living things onto the boat to survive the coming cataclysm. When the day of the deluge arrived, chaos erupted, the sky darkened, and the rains began to fall with unimaginable force. The polar ice caps melted, and a massive wall of water swept across the continents. The Anunnaki watched from the safety of their orbiting spacecraft, witnessing the utter destruction of the world they had built. They saw their cities, their mines, and their gardens submerged beneath the churning waters. Even Enlil was shaken by the scale of the devastation. The gods themselves cowered in their ships, weeping for the world that was being destroyed below. They had not fully grasped the terrifying power of the flood they had allowed to happen. As the waters began to recede, the Anunnaki descended back to a world transformed. It was a landscape of mud and ruin. They believed their mission was over and humanity was gone. But then, they saw something impossible. Ziusudra's boat, grounded on the peak of a mountain. Enlil was furious when he realized Enki had betrayed their oath. But when he saw the surviving humans, his anger gave way to a grudging acceptance. He saw their resilience, their will to live. Perhaps Enki had been right. It was in this moment that the Anunnaki faced their ultimate choice: finish the job and destroy the survivors, or accept that humanity had earned its right to exist. In a profound change of heart, they chose the latter. They decided to help humanity rebuild. In the aftermath of the Great Flood, the relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity was forever changed. The Anunnaki, their gold mission effectively over and their cities destroyed, decided it was time to leave. But they did not leave humanity empty-handed. They chose to become teachers, passing down the fundamentals of civilization. They gave humanity the gifts of agriculture, law, writing, and kingship. They established new cities like Kish and Uruk, and installed human rulers to govern in their place. They taught them how to observe the stars, how to create calendars, and how to build new societies from the mud. They were preparing humanity to stand on its own 2 feet, to inherit the earth. This period of tutelage gave rise to the world's first great civilizations in Mesopotamia and beyond. The stories of these powerful sky-dwelling gods were woven into the fabric of human culture, becoming the foundation of our earliest myths and religions. The Anunnaki leaders, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Marduk, became the gods and goddesses of the Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian pantheons. The tales of their rivalries, their creations, and their interactions with mortals were recorded on clay tablets in cuneiform script. These were not just fanciful stories, they were the distorted memories of real events, the echoes of a time when gods walked among men and shaped the course of our history. As humanity grew and flourished, the Anunnaki gradually withdrew, returning to their home planet Nibiru. They left behind a legacy of knowledge, a genetic inheritance, and a series of unanswered questions. They left humanity with the capacity for both great creation and great destruction, a reflection of the conflict between Enki and Enlil. This duality became the central struggle of the human condition. We build magnificent civilizations, create beautiful art, and explore the secrets of the universe, just as Enki would have wished. Yet we also wage terrible wars, destroy our environment, and threaten our own existence, echoing the harsh judgment of Enlil. The divine conflict of our creators became our own internal struggle. Today, as we look to the stars and decode the secrets of our own DNA, we are unknowingly retracing the steps of this ancient story. We question our origins, search for our purpose, and wonder if we are alone in the universe. The myth of the Anunnaki, whether taken as literal history or as a powerful allegory, forces us to confront these fundamental questions. Are we the product of a cosmic accident, or were we designed for a purpose? As we advance in science and technology, we gain the power to engineer life, to travel to other worlds, and to shape our own destiny. We now stand where the Anunnaki once stood, facing the same choices about creation, responsibility, and the future of life itself. The Genesis Code is not just a story about the past. It is a mirror reflecting our own uncertain future.